Thank you guys all so much for joining. This is really fun. I have no idea what's going to happen. This is all live, so you know how that goes. Like, who knows? But I am going to go ahead and share my screen because I do have a lovely little thing to go through. So here we are. We're going to get started here, which will be super fun. So anyway, we all have Prosecco. So this is our weekly wine webinar about Prosecco. And the most important part of the whole webinar is, of course, making sure that you have a glass of Prosecco poured for yourself. I know we've been over this with some of the people who joined already, but go ahead and pour yourself some Prosecco if you have not already, and cheers. Let's go ahead and drink to that. There we are. I love it. And I just dribbled that on myself too. So like I mentioned, I am I'm drinking some of this guy. This is Tiano Prosecco. So this is actually a Prosecco that's made with organic grapes, very classic, super light and refreshing. I have a feeling that a lot of you already know a bunch about Prosecco, but we're gonna go ahead and kind of go over a little bit about it.
Can't even figure anything out.
So let's get started. Here we are, you guys. This is Prosecco. So Prosecco is, of course, Italian sparkling wine, the darling of Italian sparkling wine, and some of our favorites overall. So here we are. What is Prosecco? So Prosecco, you guys, which all of you know as you're drinking it, is, of course, sparkling wine that actually comes from Italy. So this is Italy right here. We all know the beautiful the peninsula over in the Mediterranean, Adriatic Seas. Prosecco is also a region of production. So while also being the name of what we're drinking, it's also the name of the place that it comes from. And like a lot of Italian wines and most of your DOCs and DOCGs, that means that Prosecco can actually only come from that area in Italy. So specifically, you can't make California Prosecco, for example, which I think a lot of people know, but is also really good to keep in mind. So another thing that kind of defines Prosecco as a style and as a wine is how it's made. We're going to go over a little bit about that later, but it's called the Martinati method, which also has another name in French. It's called the Charmat method, and also just sort of classically the tank method as well. And then finally, in case you didn't know, Prosecco is delicious, and it is light, and it is versatile, and it's the wonderful thing to drink anytime, anywhere, anyhow. So I'm glad you're all enjoying it with me. So we're talking about Prosecco here. The thing about Prosecco that's kind of fun, so Prosecco is actually the name of a town that's in the province of Trieste, and we'll see it on the map when I kind of go to the next one. But there's basically a town that's called Prosecco, and it's been sort of other names like Prosecco and other kind of old time names that it had originally. Came down to the town. And so usually the original reference was about this little town that was in the Trieste, sort of the kind of like teeny little peninsula that sticks out all the way to the east of Italy, where it's attached to Croatia and Slovenia. And you have also, though, Prosecco is the name of the grape. Oftentimes it was referred to as the name of the grape. So make Prosecco wine. So these grapes were also planted during Roman times. As we all kind of know, I think the Romans basically were the big booze hounds of, the beginning of time. And they planted all the grapes, and they were the ones that basically created viticulture in Europe and had that. Chat. Here we are. There we go. Okay, is everyone seeing the chats now? So basically, the Romans are responsible for planting grapes. They planted the ones in Italy, of course, as you can imagine. And the thing that people don't know necessarily is that Prosecco is not the name of the grape anymore. So this is a really fun story, actually. So Prosecco used to be the name for the grape and the wine, but originally what was happening was Prosecco became really popular kind of mid-19th century, or mid-20th century, I should say. It started to take off clearly recently in the past 30 years or so. It has a huge boom. As we can see, 600 million bottles were produced in 2018. That's actually twice as much as all that champagne was produced, which is pretty crazy. So when you think about that, you have a ton of product that's out there. And it was very popular because it tends to be kind of on that affordable end of the spectrum, right? And like we discussed, it's delicious and it's light and it's refreshing and it's really, really easy to drink. So it's a great entry beverage into sparkling wines overall. But what was happening was, of course, is that other countries were kind of capitalizing on this renown that Prosecco had already started. I won't say anything, but it does happen to be that possibly Germany went for those as well. But what was happening was that they were creating sparkling wines from grapes either of their own, from their own country, or purchased and then made in their countries, and they were calling it Prosecco, so that they could get that kind of notoriety and market value for it. And, sorry guys, I know I have to with the muting. Sorry guys. but we do have here this, basically what happened was in 2009. The other one is, this is when basically what happened was the EU sort of put out all these establishments, right? And one of the things that they did for Italy was that they renamed the Prosecco grape to Glera specifically, so that now you had to use the Glera grape, and if you made wine, sparkling wine specifically, from anywhere outside of the DOC of Prosecco in Italy, you had to call it Glera on the bottle, which of course is so not as sexy as Prosecco. Opening a bottle of Glera,
you're over here. You're showing it to me. So how do you want me?
So we've got in here this new kind of movement, so that Prosecco can now only be made and named when it's from Italy, in the specific region that we'll talk about. But as you can see, I mean, obviously there was good reason to capitalize on it because it was so popular, and it still is. So it totally outproduces champagne in terms of volume, for sure. So what we have next is kind of this idea of where Prosecco comes from in Italy, right? So it is the largest DOC in Italy overall. And if you can kind of see based on the picture here, you can see the sort of smaller area down here that we're blowing up. I mean, that's a pretty large chunk of Italy. So it's in northeastern Italy. And basically it covers 9 individual provinces in Veneto and in Friuli Venezia Giulia. So Veneto is essentially this right here, these 6 provinces: Belluno, Treviso, Venezia, Padova, and Vicenza, right? So these guys here are all in the Veneto region of Italy. And then we have 4 more, and this is Friuli Venezia Giulia. So over here, you can see this is Trieste. This is basically the, so here over here, you can see this is Trieste. This is this little province of Trieste. And this is the original town of Prosecco, which is still called Prosecco, actually. And then you can see these guys, this Treviso province over here, and the Trieste province in this picture, they're a slightly different color. So they're a little bit lighter. Essentially, these are kind of considered the best zones of production for Prosecco. So for example, as you can see right here, sometimes on the labels of Prosecco bottles, you'll actually see a little bit extra information. In particular, this Prosecco DOC Treviso and Prosecco DOC Trieste. And Trieste, I should say. And so that basically means that all of the production, all of the grapes were harvested in these particular regions, and a little bit higher standard was put into place in order to produce the Proseccos. So therefore, they get to add this extra kind of nomenclature on there, which is, if you're looking for a higher quality Prosecco, can be an indication that this is going to be slightly better in quality. But we also have, so this is the DOC. So that is sort of the large, broad version. There's almost 35,000 acres of vines in the Prosecco DOC. That's massive. That is really, really, really huge, and therefore making it the largest zone of production in Italy. So the DOCG, the way that it works in Italy is DOCG is a slightly higher quality level. It means it's basically requires technically more restrictions in plantings and production so that you can expect these wines to be better. And actually, this particular area in Treviso, the Conegliano Valdobbiadene Prosecco DOCG, that is the original zone of production where basically the highest quality Prosecco wines were originally made. That was actually made a DOCG in 2009 when the Prosecco grape was renamed Glera, and the rest of all of these regions were elevated to DOC status. So basically, the whole region got a big boost in 2009 with these new regulations. But this sort of original zone of production is still considered probably some of the best Prosecco that's coming out of Italy right now. And it's pretty easy to find. There's still a lot of production out of this particular DOCG. And so much so that they've actually kind of decided to get a little bit more specific with it. So you can see sometimes things like, again, on the label, extra specifications, Cartizze, which is actually a subzone of the DOCG. And this is a part of the region that has some of the steepest hills and some of the biggest inclines and the most sort of intense soils, producing kind of even more intensely flavored wines. The thing about that makes this particular area so special for Prosecco is that it's a little bit more inland. It's actually a little bit warmer, but they have very, very steep slopes. So they get great sunshine here, and that means that the grapes are getting riper, and you actually have a little bit more of a riper fruit character that's coming out of these wines as compared to some other Proseccos from other places. But in particular, the Cartizze Superiore is something that you'll see on labels, and that's basically the creme de la creme. That's going to be like your Grand Cru Prosecco. So that's kind of fun to see if you see it on the label. The other thing that's happening in this DOCG is this Rive. It's an extra designation of individual. There's 43 individual little towns, essentially villages in this DOCG that can kind of add this Rive and then their village name onto the label. And again, this is going to be a superior quality within the DOCG itself. So if you ever see that on the label, it basically means primo. There is one other DOCG. The bottles are labeled with DOCG. Yes, so you have to basically, within Italy, the way all of the labeling has to happen, if you're DOC or DOCG, it has to be on the label. And so you'll always know that. If for some reason you see a bottle of Prosecco that doesn't have that little tag on it that says DOC or DOCG, that ain't Prosecco. That is a fraud. So I would put it down and get something else for sure. And then you have also these individual other names may or may not be on there depending on who's making it or how it's being made, but those on there do indicate better wine, which is always really, really nice to know. So that's the fun thing. So Conegliano Valdobbiadene Prosecco is going to be the DOCG that you're going to see most when you go shopping for your Prosecco. So making of Prosecco. This might be, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the method of making sparkling wine, but sparkling wine is the process by which you're able to capture CO2 in the wine in the form of these dissolved bubbles. Dissolved CO2 comes out as bubbles through a second fermentation that happens. All sparkling wine starts as a base wine, so you just make regular wine. And then what happens is the wine is put into a second fermentation. You add a little bit of sugar and a little bit more yeast, and then you basically put it in a closed environment. So that way, when the yeast turns the sugar into alcohol and releases CO2, it doesn't escape through the top of the fermenting vat, it gets stuck in the wine. And therefore you have bubbles, which is the best part about all sparkling wine and what exactly defines it. But Prosecco kind of started out like a lot of other ones, a lot of other sparkling wines, in that there wasn't a method involved, it just happened naturally. So the Glera grape in particular, it's really, really late to ripen, which means that it's always harvested kind of late in the season, late October, just later in the year, which makes it closer to winter. So originally, way, way back when they first sort of discovered sparkling wine, if you will, essentially what they did was make wine pretty late in the year, then put it into barrels and put it in their caves to just basically age over the winter time. And it got cold enough in the caves that the fermentation stopped because the yeast won't ferment below certain temperatures. And then in the spring, when the wine, when it started to warm up again, basically the yeasts woke up and then started fermenting again and produced that second fermentation and capturing CO2. So those wines, those original wines were just likely frizzante, which is only half sparkling. But in 1895 is when the method of the Charmat or Martinani method was actually invented, if you will. And this was a way to create pressurized tanks. So after making the base wine, the wine is then put into a tank and it's put under pressure so that the second fermentation can happen in this very, very large vessel under controlled circumstances, and then it captures the CO2. Now, this is different from how champagne is made. So in champagne, and when you're using the method, the traditional method that's used in champagne, that second fermentation has to happen inside of a bottle. And basically what that does is it creates a lot less of a ratio of yeast to wine. So that while the process is happening, the yeast dissolve into the wine as well, which also happens in the Martinati method, but in much grander scale. In champagne and in traditional method wines, you get that kind of brioche, bready note that a lot of people really, really like, including me. It's one of my favorite things about champagnes or traditional method sparklings. There's an added kind of textural quality and richness, and kind of specifically that pastry dough kind of note to it. So you almost smell like sourdough bread or something when you're smelling in the glass. It has a very distinct smell. If anyone has their Prosecco handy, I would encourage you to go ahead and kind of take a sniff. And I would like to point out that most likely you are not smelling anything of the sort that smells like bread or yeast. We should be smelling, depending on your Prosecco, but in all honesty, you should be smelling apples. You should be smelling fruit, freshness, lightness, and especially when you taste it, that should be exactly what you're tasting too. And that is the result of this Martinati method. It creates, it captures and retains this freshness in the wine, this delicate nature of the Glera grape, and just makes it super, super tasty, friendly, light, and easy to drink. A little bit less complex than champagne, and a lot less complex than some very, very vintagey or complex champagnes. But part of also what makes it super, super versatile and awesome and really, really easy to drink. So the funny story about the Martinati method, you'll always hear it referred to as the Martinati method in Italy, because Martinati is the man who invented it in Italy, but sadly, he didn't patent it. So it was actually in 1907 that a Frenchman with the name Charmant is the one who actually patented the method and has the sort of notoriety for it. But out of pride, all the Italians decide to call it Martinati method when referring to it. So universally, tank method is also accepted, but that's the whole idea. The second fermentation happens in a tank and it's pressurized. So overall, Prosecco is made in all ranges of sweetness. A lot of times, actually, traditionally the most common sweetness levels were usually dry and extra dry, which are not as dry as you think, because extra dry, dry champagne and dry any sparkling wine refers to the amount of dosage or the amount of sugar that's added for the second fermentation to take place. And dry wines actually have between 17 and 23 grams of sugar in them, which is actually quite a bit. It's a lot more than you might think, and definitely more than a lot of what we're used to, because your dry is to 32 grams of sugar. Your extra dry, which sounds like it should be even drier than, dry, it is, but it still has up to 17 grams of sugar in it. Brut, which is our classic, kind of what everyone is most familiar with drinking, and I think is becoming the more popular method, your Brut has less than 12 grams of sugar and can have all the way down to 0, depending on what you're getting. But Prosecco is made in all ranges, and it really depends on your palate, what you like. I prefer the drier kinds, but you can really get away with a lot more sweetness. And a lot of people associate Prosecco as being sweet because of that, but that's not always the case. It can definitely be dry. And the dry versions tend to be a little bit more food friendly for pairing as well. But there's also, as I mentioned earlier, that kind of issue of frizzante versus spumante. So these are two Italian words for sparkling wine. Frizzante actually just means demi-sparkling or half sparkling, and spumante is your full sparkling. This actually goes back to the amount of pressure that's in the bottle. So in order for it to be spumante, it has to have at least 3.5 bars of pressure in it, which is pretty typical of all sparkling wines. Anything less than that is a frizzante, and frizzante is a little bit less, so that's kind of fun. But also very, very relevant when you're looking at the bottles and trying to figure out what the heck you're drinking. And also, Prosecco has to be at least 85% Glera. And you'd think, what else is going in there? To be honest, pretty much almost all Prosecco that you're drinking is going to be 100% Glera. There's not a whole lot else that goes into it. But in these regions, in the Veneto and in Friuli Venezia Giulia, they have a wide range of international varietals too. So sometimes they'll put some Chardonnay in there, or some Pinot Blanc or some Pinot Noir, but it always has to be white. So it has to be vinified white, so pressed off the skins. You'll never find a rosé Prosecco. That's not actual Prosecco. And part of the DOC requirements do require it to be bottled. So canned Prosecco is also not legitimate Prosecco, just FYI. In case anyone's very concerned about that, I just wanted to clarify. But Prosecco is, I know this is a really hard question for everyone. It's going to be really difficult to answer how to drink Prosecco. Pretty much just easy. Just open the bottle, pour in a glass, and then drink anytime. Yeah, you guys, I mean, you guys are all doing it already. I think this is a no-brainer, but there's some fun things about Prosecco and enjoying Prosecco. So aperitivo time. I don't know if I can see a raise of hands. I wish I could. Who here has been to Italy and been to aperitivo time? Anyone? Yes. This is the most amazing thing Italians, I think, have ever come up with. So aperitivo time, if anyone is not familiar, basically between the hours of, yes, I got a couple hand raises. Thank you, guys. But we've got, there's at least between usually the hours of 6 and 9, they say, p.m. What the bars will do is, aperitivo is essentially the Italian one for aperitif. So it's the idea of having a cocktail to whet your appetite before dinner, right? In Italy, they go a step further, and the bars will have basically their aperitivo drinks, and then they will put out a spread of food. So as you get your drink, you then get to help yourself to this wide range of foods that are just being, you know, set out for your enjoyment. And it's not supposed to replace dinner. It could, but sometimes it's gone by 7 o'clock, depending on how many people are in there. Essentially, this is kind of a ubiquitous drink that goes around. You'll see in pretty much every single bar is the Aperol Spritz, or the Spritz, which is a kind of your classic Prosecco aperitif cocktail. It's real easy. It's Aperol and Prosecco. And it's delicious, honestly, because Aperol is in the family of the bitters. And Italians are famous for their bitters. Their Sinos, Campari, Cynar, Aperol, all of these guys are made with bittering agents, and those are used to like stimulate the appetite. But when you mix it with something like Prosecco, which is kind of light, tends to have a little bit of sweetness, it makes it this really ideal, very easily drinking. Usually, I mean, the official recipe, I'm actually not sure if it's 50-50 for the Spritz, but it's really, really, it's close. I would probably do about 25-75 personally, but that's just out of taste. My suggestion would be you should experiment and see how much Aperol you like with your Prosecco in your Spritz, which means you're going to have to go through a couple, I'm sure. So, but you know, we're all troopers here, right? We can all handle it. Some other fun ones are the Bellini, which is sort of, I think a lot of people are familiar with that too, but that actually originated also in Italy. Technically, it's supposed to be peach puree and Prosecco, originally white peach puree, but a lot of people will definitely use whatever. I feel like Bellini has just become this catch-all term for like fruit juice and anything that sparkles. So the original Bellini though was, of course, was with white peach. And then it was actually created in the early 1920s at Harry's Bar in Venice, which then became also in New York, and that was the origin of the cocktail. But this was a fun one that I found too, which I thought sounded pretty delicious. It's the Negroni Spagliato. And the Negroni, it's basically taking a Negroni and replacing the gin with Prosecco. So that way you're using essentially Campari, sweet vermouth, and Prosecco, topping it off with a slice of orange. That's what this beautiful drink is that we're all looking at. And then over ice. So again, really easy. It kind of makes it light, delicious, and great to kind of stimulate your appetite, or, you know, just to drink for fun. And the other thing about Prosecco is with the wide range of sweetness levels, you also have, you know, it doesn't have to just be an aperitif. It can be drank throughout your meal. But the one thing about pairing Prosecco to remember is that it's pretty delicate, as we can all taste, as we all have another sip of our Prosecco. It's delicate, it's light, it's like a little flower. So be very, very careful what you pair it with. If you have aggressive foods, you're going to hurt your Prosecco, and we don't want to do that, you know? So, and pretty much that's it, you guys. So that is our webinar on Prosecco. I certainly thank you all for joining, but I am going to go ahead and take it back to the group and see if anyone would like to have any questions or share anything. Before we go, we've got about 5 minutes left. No? You can unmute yourself if you want now. I think everyone can be unmuted if you want.
Okay, so
yes, Sylvia.
The Prosecco is only found in those 2 areas, or was it in all the areas? Because you said Trieste and Treviso.
They are, so it's found in all those areas that were highlighted in the map. So there's actually 9, there's 9 places that can be found within the regions, 9 regions within Veneto and Friuli Venezia Giulia. So those 2 that I highlighted are just considered kind of like the upper echelon of Prosecco production.
Okay.
So if you see those, it just means you're likely going to get an even better quality. Not that it isn't all fantastic, but actually that's not true. Not all of it is fantastic, just to be honest. But the goal is hopefully that you find a good one. All right, everybody. Well, I want to thank you again so much before we get kicked off. I just want to say cheers. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. I'm going to keep doing these. Thanks for sitting through this first one with me. It's been a
It was great. Thank you, Sasha.
Great.